Trevor Noah argues that segregation may be a superior solution to America's racial woes than integration. That is a bold position indeed, for a man who basically owes his entire career, such as it is, to being a diversity hire on a late-night talk show. A bold position, indeed, undoubtedly so, but one that does make a degree of sense, as he has now realized that one racial grift has ended, and so it is time to find another way to advantage himself, as that appears to be the only thing Trevor Noah has ever or will ever care about: how to get ahead for himself. Now, the clip that we will be watching here about this comes from his podcast, where the episode is titled RIP DEI, which tells you kind of everything you know. This is literally a person who started as a DEI hire going, "Oh heck, my grift is over. Now what do I do?" And he has a guest on, Ruja Benjamin. She is a scholar, heavy quotation marks intended, at Princeton University in the African American Studies department. Now, many have made the mistake of thinking that African studies would have something to do with Africa. No, not at all. The African American part simply just means that this is, well, racialized politics. We might even call it a, well, bit of race realism if we headed back a few years in time, as it is in essence largely indistinguishable from many ideas debated in the, early 1900s. But hey, details, eh? Let's actually have a look at this clip, shall we?
I found myself wondering, and this applies to America, and then maybe it'll go to other places in a different way because Finland ties in. Do you think that integration was the right move?
The look on her face as she thinks to herself, where on God's good green earth is this going?
And now I'm separating two things, because I know in America people are like, well, of course, I mean, there was racism and there was segregation, and I go, yeah, no, I'm separating them. Let's separate someone being oppressed and someone not being able to get a job and someone not being able to get a bank loan. Let's take all of those, the negative things away, because I'll put myself out personally and say, I think whether we're talking about gifted kids who are anomalous, let's say, to the norm, whether we are talking about and I mean anything that does not fit into a category. I think part of the reason Finland is able to do it is because, have you been to Finland?
It's very homogeneous.
I've been to Finland. You know who's in Finland? Finnish people. That's it. And because they're all Finnish, there's an idea of like, no, we all head in the same direction. We all know what our actions mean. And that's a really powerful thing I've learned in communicating with other people.
Imagine that. Homogeneity is a strength. That's quite the revelation. That's quite the insight right there. So he begins by saying, let's take away all of the negative things, which sounds a little bit, absurdist, but it actually does make sense. If we go like, okay, why do we integrate? Well, it is to reduce things like social stigma. It is to reduce things like racism, etc., to level the playing field and make everybody accepted. Because a part of being a homogenous society, of course, is that, well, it's homogenous. Everybody looks like you, everybody acts like you, as he's about to get to, and so on. And therefore, you can't really have a homogenous society with the strengths of being a homogenous society simultaneously with it being a diverse society. The reason for integration, therefore, was to get rid of the larger evils which we viewed them as, which was racism, etc. Now, assuming we can get rid of those, then, he says, where a homogenous society would be better. Now, of course, you can't get rid of those things and, well, still have a homogenous society. That's the problem. Those issues are specifically because you are not a homogenous society, but let's continue.
When I'm in a room with anyone where we start to tie together multiple things. So if I'm in a room with black people, already there's like an implicit trust because we know what certain actions, words, and vibes mean.
You don't say. This is starting to sound awfully mid-century German of you. Are you sure you wish to proceed down this path?
And then you're in a room with another African. Already. This person. Now, even if you shout at me, I know what your shout means. The same way an Italian knows what an Italian shout means.
Yeah.
Right? I know I'm prefacing it with a lot because it's a loaded question.
Yes.
But I would love to know if you think integration was the right solution, maybe.
So there you go. Well, he's making a correct observation here. If you share a culture and a heritage with people, then it is indeed easier to trust them. It is easier to cooperate with them. It's easier to work alongside them. This is why homogeneity is unironically a strength, whereas diversity has proven to not be one.
On the other side of, America, of civil rights.
Yeah. No, I don't. And I don't think it's actually that controversial when if you understand that segregation and integration weren't the only options. Like,
they were the only options. Well, if you want to coexist, that is.
Those are within those two options. It may seem like integration is the more progressive. Like, of course, we don't want segregation. But again, when you're being integrated into institutions, into a culture that's a supremacist culture, that's a culture that feeds off of hierarchy, that feeds off of insecurity, anxiety, why are we being integrated?
Right. So her counter-argument, this is the Princeton professor, is that I'm sorry, that's debris on my desk, is that white society is oppressive, has supremacist leanings, feeds on anxiety, hierarchy, etc. All of this nonsense. And she is therefore going to argue again that black communities wouldn't do that. And therefore you would have the oppressive, mean, evil white hierarchy on the one side, which you have been integrated to, therefore that is a bad thing, and you have Wakanda on the other, literally. The thing is, Wakanda has never existed. It's very unlikely to ever exist. Even if, at this point, African Americans were simply abandoned on the American continent and left to their own devices, with all of the resources of America still intact, they still would not build Wakanda, for the simple reason that Africa is an even richer continent than America is. And yet still, they haven't built Wakanda. That is her argument, in essence, that black people would build an even better society. And that is also Trevor Noah's argument, indirectly so, as he presents it here. Homogeneity is a strength, integration was an error. Okay, what's the alternative? It is segregation, with, of course, the advantage being given to his kind. This is, on one hand, a rather sudden U-turn from previous Trevor Noah, which, again, I didn't make up the whole DEI diversity hire thing, as all the way back in 2015, he was banging the drum for diversity, which, well, it got him a pretty sweet gig, so who's surprised? And, well, he created his career and economic success of his skin color, of being born in a country that actually did have genuine segregation. The stuff he's kind of arguing for now, amusingly enough. In Africa, and what was it here? What was it? There was bound by its scheme of absurd measures, his mom took hiding him from the government, could at any moment steal him away. Finally liberated by the end of South Africa's tyrannical white rule. He went to America and became a very rich diversity hire. He has built his career off this. And even back in 2021, he was still advancing the same argument. The thing people take for granted with diversity is that it's hard work, but the upsides are so much greater, said Trevor Noah. Well, what changed? What suddenly transformed his opinion here? The literal name of his podcast tells you. DEI is dead in America. DEI is what gave him that position on The Late Show. DEI is what gave him a best-selling book. DEI is the reason why he is the person he is today, and now that that is dying out, and he can no longer simply play on his color and his background, he needs to come up with something else, and he hasn't really prepared to operate in a system where people actually get an equally fair shot, regardless of their, arbitrary characteristics. So instead he thinks, alright, well what if we just segregate it instead? That way I'll have a far smaller pool of competitors, especially if we add in some artificial advantages as well. Trevor Noah holds no principled position on this whatsoever, beyond, I wonder what will advantage myself the most. And amusingly enough, of course, this can also easily be reflected in the fact that his position is treated radically different than everybody else's, since we've actually heard a similar position espoused not that long ago. Remember this? The creator of Dilbert? He went on a racist rant just a couple of years ago, where in essence he said, and I think this is the video here, that white people just need to stay away from black people because you can't help them, was his point, and therefore you were better off simply just removing yourself from them. And he has then stated that he had moved to a neighborhood that was full of white people specifically for that purpose. You know, segregating himself. But that was a racist rant. If you're somehow missing the point and the nuances here, it's fairly simple. Black good, white evil. That really is the position of the average progressive these days. And I think it's telling too that our educated professor here, or well, educated in racial studies, that is of course entirely on board with this idea immediately. At no point does she push back on the idea of this being bad or this being deeply racist to segregate people dependent upon their skin color. No. Of course not. The problem is just that white people have such a terrible system. And if the whiteys would just leave, well, we'd finally have that Wakanda we'd all been dreaming about. Well, I mean, I'm warming to the idea myself. Now that it's gaining such wide and general biracial appeal, perhaps it is time yet again we revisit the question of segregation. Worked out so well the last time we tried it, right? Why not go for a second round? And also, I love the fact that she mentioned that integration seemed like the progressive option, as this is obviously the follow-on point for anyone that's a literal racial ideologue. You use progressivism to get what you want, because it is an ideology that artificially advantages you. Then, as soon as you no longer can extract further artificial advantages from that position, you dump it, and preferably use its weapons against itself to gain a better position. That is all that is happening here. These people are actual, unironic, literal racists, which can be quite easily identified by the fact that they are now asking for segregation. There is really no other way to put it. There is no way to sugarcoat it any longer. So, hey, do with that information what you will, I suppose. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.